I am a lucid dreamer. Thanks to a technique I learned on the net, I have the ability to dream about absolutely anything I want. This technique works well, especially with patience and perseverance. You just need to simply set a reminder on your phone at a fixed time of the day, making sure that it rings every day at the same time. Put whatever you want on the alarm label, and once you hear it, put your finger on a wall or a solid surface, and try to go through it with the sheer power of your thought. This may seem a bit silly at the moment, but if you do it rigorously, at some point your brain will format itself to this habit, and you might hear this alarm ringing in one of your dreams. If the technique has been followed and the alarm goes off while you're dreaming, you should be able to easily pass through the solid surface with your finger. And then, either you'll wake up instantly or you'll enter what's called a lucid dream. It's hard to get bored in this kind of dream, because anything that comes to mind is possible. You can travel from building to building, like Spider-Man would, or even become the supervillain that all heroes fear. You can become anyone, find yourself in a distant country with just a snap of your fingers. Even traverse the lunar surface or any other celestial body by the sheer force of your thought. In other words, it's an entire world that you will be able to shape according to your desire. Everything is possible there, the best and the worst. Being an experienced traveler for several years, lucid dreams had no more secrets for me. But recently, something incomprehensible happened to me, which is beyond understanding. What happened in one of my dreams had a real impact on the real world. As I told you, I am used to this kind of experience. So I spend a lot of time on forums discussing this with other people, in my case. We share our past experiences, and that's the future. That's how I came across a Reddit thread that talked about things you should never do in a lucid dream. In it, several different people had commented on the author's post. Some talked about bad experiences in their dreams following very specific choices they had made. For instance, gazing into a stranger's eyes for an extended period, which earned him the attention and saw his face deform in a terrifying way. Others mentioned strange entities that came and went depending on the places they visited. In fact, I saw many people saying that places of worship should be avoided, because lucid dreams could thus turn into real nightmares, which made them lose all control over them. That's how I came across a member much lower down the list who had left a very intriguing message that caught my full attention. The message appeared hastily composed and poorly written. He had received no response and had really gone unnoticed among all the other comments. His username is Eric2001 and he had written this: "Do not make the mistake of asking someone the time in one of your dreams. I'm living a real hell. If anyone has gone through the same thing as me, please send me a private message." At the time I was really skeptical reading it. I didn't understand why asking for the time could create something so negative in a dream. I then sent him a private message to simply ask him what had happened to him. But since it was getting late, I didn't wait for his response and I went to bed. That night, I once again had a lucid dream. In it, I was a detective investigating the murder of a woman in her 30s. I had arrived at the station where the crime scene was when my eyes landed on the large clock at the entrance of the platform. The hands were moving in all directions and simply had no logic. But this kind of oddity happens frequently in dreams, and I quickly returned to the scene of the crime to continue my investigation. But the sight of that clock reminded me of that famous post I had just seen on Reddit. How can asking someone for the time be so dramatic? I was certain that this was simply a bad experience, that it was unique to each person, that it was not a constant in dreams, so that it inevitably turns into a nightmare. My teammate, on the other hand, was writing his report behind the yellow tape, near the crime scene, which was surrounded by curious onlookers. So I turned to him and I asked him, can you tell me what time it is?" At that moment, something strange happened. He suddenly stopped writing and his eyes widened. But he kept staring at the notepad in his hands. Just as I was about to ask him the question again, I noticed something behind him. There, where all the people were behind the ribbons, he was staring at me. All heads were turned towards me, and they were looking straight into my eyes. My teammate then gently raised his head, and he said 0809. His voice had become dark, almost cavernous. And without warning, everyone in the crowd, including my teammate himself, started to scream, so loud that my entire body started to shake. I woke up in a sweat. I reached out to my bedside table to grab the glass of water that was there. But I was so disturbed that without paying attention, I dropped the glass and it shattered on the floor. I caught my breath, tried to gather my thoughts and did my best to stop the panic that was gradually beginning to take over me. I got up to get some water from the fridge and a broom to clean the floor. I walked into the kitchen, and out of the corner of my eye, I'm certain I saw numbers written in red on the stove, right next to the refrigerator. The numbers were exactly the same as those in my dream 0809. But when I stared at the plate, I noticed that there was nothing left. So I chalked it up to stress, but also fatigue, as I had only gotten an hour of sleep. It was about 2 in the morning, and since I had to get up early, I quickly drank my glass of water and immediately went back to bed. Just a few minutes after lying down, I dreamed. It was at that moment that I started to have the first dream of a very long series, dreams that I called the Black Dreams. As its name suggests, there was nothing but darkness. I couldn't even see my own hands, my body, or anything else. There was only black. I could hear the sound of my footsteps, my breathing, my voice, but I saw absolutely nothing. When I arrived in the black dream, I immediately tried to wake up, but it was simply impossible. I didn't understand anything about what was happening, and I even started to feel intense fear. I ran everywhere, I screamed, I tried to perceive the slightest trace of light somewhere. It was not only impossible for me to wake up, but also to see the slightest light. And apart from the noise of my own voice or my steps, the silence was such that it gave me constant anxiety. Usually, I was able to estimate without any difficulty the duration of my dream, and, therefore, to guess the time I stayed in bed sleeping. There, I was certain that I had this dark dream for at least 3 hours. I was starting to get really worried, and I even wondered if I wasn't dead, and that all of this was some kind of limbo where the deceased wandered indefinitely. And it's when I started to believe that all my hopes of waking up were lost that I noticed a small light, like a tiny star, in the vastness of the cosmos. I immediately ran as fast as possible in its direction, and then I saw that the small point was getting bigger and bigger. I was finally getting closer to a source of light, and I was then certain that this was my only chance to get out of this horrible nightmare. As I approached, what I saw slowly came into focus. At first, I thought they were particularly bright words in this immense darkness. But as I continued to get closer, I then noticed that it wasn't that. They were not words, but numbers. The numbers that I had read earlier on my stove, the numbers that had been spoken by the person in my previous dream. 0809. Immediately after I woke up, my body was once again shaking and also seized with intense panic. I noticed my bed was soaked with sweat, so I got up with difficulty to go change the sheets. I couldn't get these damn numbers out of my mind. I couldn't understand their meaning, nor even the reason why it was always these same numbers. When I changed the sheets and made the bed, I went to bed right away. But I was far too worried about having that horrible nightmare again. I was desperate to understand what was happening to me. So I went to my computer and returned to the thread where Rick2001 had posted. When I opened his profile, I noticed that his warning message was the very last one he had posted on the platform. Moreover, he had not responded to my message either. I didn't understand what was happening to me, and I was totally helpless in the face of the situation. I then looked at the time as fatigue and fear were slowly getting the better of me, and my heart immediately missed a beat. For a second, or maybe a microsecond, I couldn't tell you precisely. I saw those horrible numbers 0809. The next moment, they had completely disappeared. And while I was just trying to digest what I had just seen, I then saw the actual time it was. My heart started beating so fast that I had trouble continuing to watch the screen. I tried to redo the calculation, but the horrible possibility had then been confirmed. Based on the time, I had only slept for 10 minutes. So I spent the rest of the night refreshing the page, but Eric never gave any response, not even the slightest sign of life. It was with a trembling and exhausted body that I forcibly returned to my bed to try to regain a minimum of energy. Luckily, I didn't dream that night, but the weeks that followed only worsened my condition. I never had a single normal dream after that. Not remembering my dreams was the best thing that could happen to me. Because dark dreams had become my daily life, they always unfolded in the same way. I couldn't see anything, and I had to search for the glowing numbers in the darkness to finally manage to wake up. I haven't gone back to work since the first dark dream. I haven't even left my house since all this started. I've seen those numbers everywhere. Sometimes painted against the wall or on the ceiling, sometimes on the microwave where the timer is displayed, other times right outside, in the sky when I looked out the window. But every time I stared at it for more than a second, it completely disappeared. So I just spent my days and nights trying to find people who had experienced the same thing as me, without ever finding anything concrete. But this morning when I woke up, I had an idea. I typed into the search engine the username of RIG 2101. And at first, there was no mention of him except on the Reddit platform. Then, it was by digging through his old messages that I was able to get new information. So I was able to find out that he lived in Switzerland. Afterwards, I tried everything on Google. I typed his username followed by Switzerland. Then, I tried to do the same thing on Facebook in the event of finding his real profile, but it didn't yield any results. And it's when I was about to stop my searches that I had an idea. So I typed Rick into Google, followed by the numbers 2101, but in the form of a date, which roughly gave Rick 21, January, Switzerland. And then I came across the article that motivated me to deliver this message to you. Rick had died in a car accident that 21st of January. His body was found several meters away, completely crushed against a massive tree. The numbers that were in front of his username were undoubtedly the ones he had heard in his dream, just after asking for the time. If I'm telling you all this, it's not only to warn you, but also to give you proof about everything I'm telling you. If my message can help save lives, at least I've done something good just before dying. And if I've decided to tell you only now, it's for a very simple reason. The numbers 0809 that I've heard and seen these past weeks correspond to a date, the 7th of September, and unfortunately for me, that date is today.